Hello and welcome back. Today we have another Cuddle Up Sampler tutorial video. We are going to be making the adorable sheep block. Many of you are familiar with this little guy from the Woolly Stars quilt and then Woolly Wall Hanging, and now we have him in our Cuddle Up Sampler. This is always such a fun one to piece, but it is a lot of piecing, so we are going to need to dive right in. If you are new to the Cuddle Up Sampler Sew Along, you can join in at any time. I have all of the information linked in the description box below this video, so you can dive right in. You will need a copy of the Cuddle Up Sampler pattern, which is available for sale in local quilt shops, online quilt shops, and I do have it linked in my Etsy shop below. Now, go ahead and turn to page 15 in your book, and you are going to want to cut pieces A through Y. And we're going to get cracking because we do have a lot of piecing to do. So to begin, in step number 1, you are going to want to draw a diagonal line on the back of the 4 E squares, which I have done here already. And then we are also going to grab our A rectangle, which is this one up here. We are going to add these E squares in the lower corners of the rectangle using the stitch and flip method that we've chatted about quite a bit in previous blocks. And I'm going to grab the next couple pieces that we need too. You'll see in step 2, we're going to be using O squares and adding those as stitch and flip corners on the top 2 corners of A. So let's grab our O squares, and I have already marked those diagonals as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and place those up here and then take this up to my sewing machine and get those corners all sewn on. This is what our unit looks like now. You can see the pressing on the back. Everything is pressed away from the center. The next thing that we need to do, you will see in step number 3, we are going to sew the P rectangle to the top of this unit. So we'll grab P. That is going to get sewn to the top. And at the same time, I'm going to move on to step number 4 and start working on one of the half square triangles that we're going to need for the first sheep ear. So that involves using pieces Q and B. So I will grab those. Q, I have already marked my diagonal line. And B, up here, we will need one of those. We're going to be making a half square triangle with these 2 pieces. So you will mark your diagonal line, and then you're going to be sewing a 1/4 inch away from both sides of that marked diagonal, or some of you may be opting to mark the sewing lines as opposed to the cutting line. Whichever method you choose to use is just fine. Turn this into 2 half square triangles, trim down to the measurement shown in step number 4. You are only going to be using one of these half square triangles, so you just need to trim the first one. Don't need to worry about the second one. This is what unit 1 looks like now. These are the 2 half square triangles. This is the one that has been trimmed down to size. I didn't do anything further with this one, and we are not going to be using that one in our block. The next step is step number 5. We are going to be sewing an E stitch and flip corner to the black star corner of the half square triangle. So you'll grab E, and we're going to be orienting that diagonal like so. At the same time, I'm going to grab the pieces I need for step 6, which is F and R. So here is R and F right here. We're going to be sewing these 2 pieces together like you see in step 6. This is what our half square triangle unit looks like now with that stitch and flip corner added, the pressing on the back, and then the unit that we made in step number 6. The next thing that we need to do is sew together these 2 units along with an R rectangle right here. And this is going to create our right ear unit of our sheep. So we're going to place this like so, R at the top, and then this unit down below, and you will sew these 3 pieces together. You're going to press these away from the center. This is what the right ear unit will look like after you've sewn all those pieces together, and then the back of that. For this intersection right here, that one's a little bit tricky because we can't butt those seams up like we typically would because of the angle that this is coming in at. So you will want to be careful. You may need to pin. I'm not a pinner and I did skip the pinning on this one and it matched up really nicely for me, but that is an intersection that might give you a little bit of a fuss that you would want to just pay attention to when you're sewing there. The next step that we need to do is to sew these two units together. They're going to get sewn like this. Slide this down here. And again, this little intersection right here is one to pay attention to as you are sewing because we do want this to be a nice uniform line coming down through here like what you see here. So pay attention to that, but we're going to sew those two together. And then as always, as you are working your way through the pattern, make sure you're double checking your block measurements as you work your way through to make sure that you're sewing accurately. I'm going to sew those, but I am also going to grab the pieces that I need here in step number 9, which is G, this big G piece over here. And we are going to be adding a stitch and flip T corner to the lower right side here. So I'm going to grab my T, which is up here. And this is going to be placed like this. And we're going to do another stitch and flip corner for this piece here. This is what my head and ear look like right now. And then this is the other unit that we just pieced. My intersection turned out really nicely, even without pinning right there, which was wonderful because we all know that not all sewing days are equal and some days things just don't go like that. You remember my wreath block from a couple weeks ago? Those just didn't want to line up no matter how much I fussed with those. So sometimes these are going to work nice and sometimes you're just going to have to pay a little bit more attention. But it's a good sewing day for me today and those came out real nicely for me. The next step that we need to do is down here in step 10, we are going to sew this piece to S, which is this right here. So those two pieces get sewn together. And then after we sew those two together, then we are going to sew this head to this piece here. So let me slide this over and show you what that's going to look like. So it's going to get put together like this right here. So you will sew this, and then once you've sewn this, sew this portion to the top of this unit. This is what unit 2 looks like. And now we are going to move on to step 12. We're going to be using the stitch and flip method to sew a T square to one side of an H rectangle. Here's our H rectangle. And then grab another T square up here. And right here, we are wanting that diagonal to run in this direction. Always pay attention to the direction of your marked diagonals. We're going to use the stitch and flip method to sew T to H. And I'm also going to grab the pieces that I need here in step 13. We're going to be making another half square triangle. This one works the same way as the first half square triangle we made, where we will only be using one of the half square triangles. The pieces that we need are I and B. So let's grab those. There's I and the other B. So I have drawn my diagonal line. I'm going to be sewing 1/4 inch away from both sides of that marked diagonal. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim that down to the size listed in step 13. Here is our unit 3 piece, the half square triangle trimmed down to size. For this one, I didn't even bother sewing that second sewing line. I knew I wasn't going to need this section, and so I just sewed just the side I needed, saved myself a little bit of time. The next step that we need to take is to sew a stitch and flip corner using the E square, just as we did when we made this piece up here. So we're going to grab E. This gets placed right sides together, and we will add that stitch and flip corner right there. After you have completed this unit with that stitch and flip corner, then you are going to sew unit 3 together with this piece, which you see right here illustrated in this diagram. Here is what that unit looks like now. You can kind of see how it's going to start fitting onto your sheep head here. But first we need to sew J to the bottom of this unit. So we're going to sew these two pieces together, and then we are going to move into making an Ohio star block. Now you're going to be glad to know this is a roomier Ohio star block than some of those we've made previously, so that always makes the piecing a little bit simpler when our pieces are bigger. So we're going to be moving into the construction of this Ohio star block. You're going to need an M square and a K square. So here are our M squares and 2 K squares. You'll draw a diagonal line on the back of both of those, and we're going to be starting by creating those half square triangles. Now you'll remember when we make Ohio star blocks, those first half square triangles, we don't need to worry about trimming those up. You're just creating them, and then we are going to trim everything just a little bit later. So we can sew these pieces together and then start the construction of our half square triangles. This piece is now complete, and we can just kind of tuck that away for right now. My half square triangles are sewn together, and as you can see, they have not been trimmed. These get pressed towards the darker fabric. I still need to draw my diagonal line across the back of 2 of these. This diagonal line runs in the opposite direction from the sewn diagonal. And I'm just going to mark this on 2 of these. And then we are going to be pairing these with the unmarked half square triangles and sewing them together again. Isn't it nice having these bigger pieces in comparison to the last ones that we did for those earlier Ohio star blocks? These are nice and roomy. So now we're going to pair these together, and you're going to be sewing 1/4 inch away on both sides of that marked diagonal. Once you've done that, you will cut apart the units on the marked diagonal, press as it shows here, and then you can trim these down to size. You're going to trim these to the size listed in step 19. You can use whatever your favorite method for trimming these would happen to be. The 1/4 square triangles are now complete, pressed, and trimmed down to size. The next thing that we need to do is construct the Ohio star block. You're going to do that using L squares and then an N square for the center. You're going to sew those together in rows across, pressing as shown here. And then once you have constructed those rows, then you will sew everything together, and your final 2 seams are pressed away from the center. The Ohio star block is now complete. This is what it looks like on the back. Look how giant that is compared to some of our last Ohio stars. This is the last one we're going to be making for this sampler. We do have some sawtooth stars that we're going to be making, but the last of the Ohio stars. The next steps we need to take are steps 22 and 23. In step 22, you're going to sew a J rectangle to the bottom of the Ohio star. And then after you have sewn those 2 pieces together, you're going to sew a T stitch and flip corner to the bottom left side of this joined unit. So sew the rectangle to the bottom of the Ohio star, and then this is going to be a stitch and flip corner sewn to this lower corner. This is what that unit looks like now. Here's the back. You can see the pressing. And the next step for this piece is to sew it together with this piece right here. Sew those 2 together. You can see your pressing down here in step number 24. We're going to be pressing it towards this piece right here. I'm going to sew those, but while I'm doing that, I want to grab the next pieces that I need here in step number 25. I'm going to be making another half square triangle. This is another one where we will only need one of the half square triangles that we create. We're going to use C and V. So here is C, and then V right here. So we're going to sew these together. I'm going to sew 1/4 inch away from both sides of that marked diagonal. Of course, you could opt just to sew on one side since we know we aren't going to be using the second half square triangle. Here is what this piece looks like now once those sections have been sewn together. My half square triangle has been trimmed down to the measurement listed in step 25. This is actually the little tip of your tail right here. That's what this is going to end up being. And we are going to need to sew U and R to each side of this half square triangle. So let's grab one of these U's. This is going to go on the right side, and then R is going to go on the left side. You're going to sew those 3 pieces together. This is the tail unit we just completed. We're going to do a couple steps together right here. First, we're going to sew the tail unit to the left side of this Ohio star block unit. And then once we have sewn those 2 pieces together, we're going to sew U to the top. And then after we have sewn those together, we're going to sew the sheep head to this unit right here. Here's where we're at now with our Mr. Woolly Stars. And this intersection up here is the same as we encountered on this other side, so you might need to pay a little bit of extra attention right there. I didn't have luck on my first go around, so I did have to unpick, and then I had to pin to get that one to match up as I wanted it to. So here's where we're at now. We have just a couple more steps to go. The next thing that we need to do is make our feet unit, which uses W rectangles, D rectangles, and an X square. So you're going to sew these units together. You can see in step 29 how to press. We're pressing everything towards these dark D rectangles. Feet are complete. They get sewn to the bottom of the top unit. And then after sewing these 2 pieces together, the final steps that you need to take are Y stitch and flip corners around each of the block corners. So you will place these all around the corners as you see here in step 31. And our adorable sheep block is now complete. So that one took a little bit more piecing, but these blocks always turn out just so cute. I hope you have enjoyed piecing your sheep block. And if you have any questions, be sure to leave those for me. I'll catch you again next time.